Good day. This is Emmanuel Holowali on Legal Angle with Emmanuel the Law Holowali. Thank you for joining us on this episode and welcome to the new year. This is the first episode in the year 2021, and I have with me a special guest today. Her name is Jumi Jumoke Holowali. She is a therapist. She's also the founder and CEO of Focus Counseling Clinic in Columbus, Ohio. She handles people with issues of depression, mental health issues, and other um, psycho, no, other psychological issues. Okay, I'll let you introduce yourself to our audience since you can toot your own horn. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Jimmy Olawale, same last name. Yes, I am a therapist. I have my own private practice, group practice in Grandview, Ohio, where we work with people that struggle with different types of mental health disorders, stress issues, trauma issues, depression, anxiety, marital issues, and so on and so forth. And I'm happy to be joining you this afternoon.
Okay. And for full disclosure, even though we share the same last name, Jimmy Olawale is my wife. And welcome to the show. Okay. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Yeah. Today we're going to be talking about how to mentally prepare ourselves for the new year, which is 2021. Because 2020 was a year that was filled with a lot of disappointment, unexpected changes, disruption of resolutions, and social distancing, even some destruction of relationships too because of those distances, job losses, financial hardship, and a whole lot of ups and downs for a lot of people. So now we're in the new year, 2021. The only difference between 2020 and 2021 is just a flip of the calendar. The pandemic is still there, things are still the way they are, although vaccinations, now we have vaccines, but the rollout has been pretty slow. A lot of people don't even know when it's going to be their turn. And a lot of people are still going through the same mental challenges that they were going through in 2020. The difference is just that, like I said, a flip of the calendar. So, having said that, you as a psychotherapist, handling, helping people to go to you know, navigate the struggles of mental health. How should people approach making new goals or resolutions for the new year?
Well. Um, you said it all about 2020. It's been tough for many people. And my suggestion will be to give room for flexibility. We know that many of us had our goals set out for 2020 without the thought or knowledge that we're going to be dealing with a pandemic that was going to affect everyone globally. And here we are. And so many of those things that we had on our vision boards have not come to pass. Many of those resolutions that we made were just moot as a result of being stuck in the house, not having a lot of social contact, businesses failing, people losing their jobs, and so on and so forth. So, with that taken into consideration, I think that it is important that moving into 2021, as we are here, to make sure that we allow room for evolution. We allow room for flexibility rather than being rigid about things. Because if this pandemic has taught us anything, is that things can change in a few seconds, and lives can be turned upside down in just a short while.
Hmm. So, you're advising people to be flexible and not be rigid in making plans for the new year.
Yes.
Okay. And there are some people who felt stuck because of the pandemic, disappointed because of their lack of growth in 2020. How can they process their disappointment in light of the new year, because like the new year is like an artificial movement to a restart. The reality is that the days are still the same, the nights are still the same, but we have this artificial recalibration of the calendar and of the year just because we went, around the sun. So how can they handle the disappointments, even though they're still stuck in it?
Yeah, well, a lot hasn't changed, right? I mean, we're now in 2021. It's a new year, I guess, but we're still in the middle of a pandemic. And what I would say to those people who feel disappointed because maybe some of the goals that they set last year, they were not able to meet them, I will say, join the club. I think many of us are experiencing the same thing, that you are not alone in that, and you should not beat yourself up because none of us have ever been in a pandemic before. There is no playbook in terms of how to handle being in a pandemic. There is no perfect way to be in a pandemic. I think we're all kind of, flying the plane while making it at the same time. And so if anyone tells you that they have the playbook exactly how you should be, I think you should look at them twice and give them a side eye. So when it comes to dealing with those disappointments, I think it's okay. Many of us are grieving during this pandemic, and it doesn't have to mean that you lost someone to death. I think even grieving the loss of normalcy, grieving the loss of predictability, grieving the loss of, hopes and dreams that were attached to this, new year when we just, entered 2020. Many of us are having to deal with that in real time. So I would just say be patient with yourself, be kind to yourself, understand that you're not alone in this. And it doesn't mean that you're a failure. I would say, focus more on the things that you were able to accomplish, because we had to we had to kind of create a way to be. Many of us became teachers. Many of us had to quit our jobs. Many of us became unemployed. We lost our homes, we lost our jobs and things like that. So we had to think on our feet. And rather than focusing on the things you were not able to achieve in 2020, I think shifting focus and paying attention to the things that you were able to accomplish in 2020. The fact that you're still standing in the midst of this craziness, I think, is something that is worthy of some kudos.
Okay, thank you. And I think, a lot of people are also experiencing or suffering from adjustment disorder, because when we talk about grieving, grieving doesn't only have to do with the death of the soul or the death of a person. So people are struggling through the death of not being able to hang out with their families, not being able to go to the office, having to work remotely. A lot of children are also suffering from the fact that they've not been able to see their friends for months. How can people handle this losses, this adjustment? Because it's been months, almost a year now, and a lot of people have still not adjusted to the new normal.
Yeah, it's hard to adjust, especially because you don't know when this will end. You don't know how it will end. You don't know whether or not you are going to be furloughed from your job. There's so many factors that are at play right now that it's hard to really be certain about how to move forward. So, if you are struggling in the midst of all of these changes, it just makes you human, right? I mean, there is no way that you are going to have change without loss. And there's no way you're going to have loss without grieving. I often say this to people, that any change that comes requires us to grieve it, because there are some losses that come in it, even if those changes are good changes. And so just taking the time to really grieve some of the losses that you've experienced, to really challenge your own self, challenge your thought processes around these matrix of successes that we've created for ourselves, what it means to be successful, going into 2020 pre-pandemic. It's not the same matrix. It has to change. And I think that, many of us have to work at evolving, right? Because these changes require different tools, requires you to pull out from different toolboxes. So whatever you thought success was before, maybe it's monetary, maybe it's promotion at work, maybe it's your business expanding, and you're not experiencing those things, this is the time to start reassessing the idea of what success is. Success might now mean that you are spending more time with your family. Success might not mean that you are now spending time, doing some deep introspection, doing some journaling. Success can now mean that you're having time to take up a new hobby, that you are doing, some form of exercise. Success means that you're reading more books. Success means that you are realizing that all of the bags and the shoes and the clothes that you thought you needed, all of the things that you thought were really important, are completely useless when there is no one to kind of show them off to, when there is no one to kind of look at what you're wearing or your shoes that you're wearing or the perfume that you're wearing. You realize a lot of things that you thought you needed are not the things you need. And the things that you actually need to survive are basic. They are just people. They're people that love you, care about you, being able to have hugs and things like that. So reassessing what it means to be successful in light of the pandemic is important so that your expectations are not unfair and put you in a position where you are sabotaging yourself.
There are no growth without losses. Because you have to sacrifice something for other things. Same way to say there are no movement without friction. There have to be you have to let go of some things even to have growth. So some people are battling depression and anxieties. They did that throughout 2020, because of the pandemic. Now in the new year, they are looking forward to a better, to have a better year. How can they transition from the depression and anxieties that they've had because of the pandemic last year to having a better mental health in 2021?
I think just making your mental health a priority is going to be really important. Putting that at the forefront of your mind, understanding that there are so many things that are out of your control. How quickly this pandemic is going to kind of run its course is out of your control. So if you're already struggling with depression and anxiety, understand that it is a natural human response to distress, right? And we're all dealing with it and we're all having to respond to it in the ways that our body can handle, right? Anxiety has advantages. It is there to is there to protect you. It's there for your body to protect you, right? It's when it goes to the level where you are not able to function, that is when it becomes something that is a disorder. So things are no longer in an orderly fashion. Even depression, it's just because your body has to work through all of the distress. So if you never struggled before with anxiety or depression prior to this pandemic, and now you're starting to feel depressed and anxious, I don't want you to be alarmed by it. I want you to understand that it's normal. I want you to understand that there's no way that you're going to be cut off from your sources of support. The transition that happens when you're going from home to work, that's gone. Having to have a different space where you work outside of the home and come into the house and being with your family, having to have those transitions and changes and people to look forward to and going to the movies and going to, the store without masks and things like that. There's no way those things are not going to impact you, right? Even visually, I remember somebody saying to me that they had a baby during this pandemic, and because they had the baby during this pandemic, their child had never seen a full face adult before, except just the parents. And then I don't know where they said they went, maybe a doctor's office or to the store or something like that. And when they saw a full face, they just started crying. They were afraid. I think somebody came to visit them actually, and the baby was afraid because the baby had never seen a full-face adult except for the parents. So if that is happening to a brand new baby, right, it's happening to us as well. It's easy for us to understand the baby because we're there to protect them, but adults are having the same responses, and your body is going to deal with it the way that it is able to, or the way that you're genetically predisposed to deal with it.
Thank you. There's some school of thoughts that are saying that people should not even try to make any resolution for the new year because of what happened last year. What do you think about that?
I'm not a big resolution person. So, it depends on who you ask. I'm not saying you shouldn't have goals. I'm not saying you should, I'm big on goals. I believe, you should think about what you've done this past year. What are the things that you were able to accomplish? What are the things that you were not? How do you move forward? How do you better yourself? Right. But I'm not a big fan of rigidly creating this thing that looks like new year, new me, right? And a lot of times resolutions are based on like you started this new year and a new you has emerged, and I have to go and work with this new me, which really I think is not the right way to think about moving into a new year. I think your old you is very important in this new year. Understanding that your old you has been through a lot, understanding your old you has brought you so much, understanding your old you is resilient. And so the language that you use to describe yourself moving forward is going to be important. So, should you have resolutions? It depends. If it works for you, then go for it. But I don't believe in rigidly trying to stick to something because, again, this pandemic as a gift has taught us that we don't always have control of things. So, what happens when some of those resolutions that you have don't come to pass? How rigidly you hang on to them, how you define yourself is going to impact how you feel about it moving forward.
Thank you. The year 2020 was a year that was filled with a lot of deaths. We have over 340,000 Americans who died, millions more were sick, and even up till now, there are still people who are still sick, and many are still grieving. So for those who are still grieving the death of loved ones, how can they plan for a new year in the midst of their grieving?
That is a really important question and a tough one because it's really hard to quantify the loss that people have experienced, the depth of pain and trauma that many people are dealing with. And so for those people, my heart really goes out to you. Your life matters, your family matters, people that have passed, their lives matter. And what I will say to you is that grieving is different for everyone. Grieving is something that is not just emotional, it is something that is also physical. So you might find yourself in the place of grieving that your heart literally physically hurts. Your stomach literally physically hurts. It feels like you can't even move. Your mind doesn't feel like it's rooted. You might feel like you've lost your mind. And I want to just let you know that you haven't. That grieving is the price that you pay for love. And so you need to give yourself some time. You need to have some patience. Understand that this is not going to just go away just because everybody's moving on with their lives, just because time keeps ticking, just because a new year has come through, does not mean that your life has not come to a halt. And I often say that people who are grieving occupy two different time zones. There's a time zone where you lived with the person that's passed, that is permanently gone, where the clock stopped for you. And then there's a time zone that you exist in where you go to work, you have to go to shower, you have to, provide, produce, and all of those things. And you're constantly straddling these two different time zones. And it's difficult. It's difficult because you have to return to work, you have to make money and all of those things. Somebody might crack a joke or whatever, you might laugh and you might feel guilty. Understand that it is a very powerful, very, very different, unique thing to be in a grieving space, to have lost someone. And there is a strength that is born out of that place of pain that nobody really understands what it means to live in two different time zones, but only people who have experienced grieving can understand that. And what a powerful, what a special gift it is that you are able to do that, and understand that it will take time. So be patient with yourself. You might feel an internal push and pressure or an external push and pressure to get over it, to move on with it, but you don't need to. Take your time. It will take a long time. I cannot guarantee that you will never grieve. I think grieving is permanent. I just think you get to learn how to carry it over time.
Hmm. It is unique to be in a driven space. And as a result of social distancing and the fact that the coronavirus is very contagious, so a lot of people who suffered losses are not able to share their grief with relatives, friends, and even some family members in person, you know, and they still have this residual effect of grieving. How can they process their grief in a healthy way based on the circumstances of not being able to share with people, in a communal way?
Yeah, grieving is hard to do alone. Grieving, there are two parts of grieving. There's a part of grieving that requires the community, and there's a part of grieving that is an individual journey. Unfortunately, being in this pandemic has cut off many people from that social communal response that is absolutely important in the process of healing. You and I are from Nigeria, and you and I have these conversations a lot. We had this conversation last night about the importance of the community coming alongside of you when you are grieving, and how that really helps a lot, in that process. For us in Nigeria, when you are grieving, you're at home for the next, like, what, 40 days or something. People come over, they help, they cook, they do all of these things for you. Then after 40 days, there's this, like, a little bit of party, kind of celebration that you do, right? But then there's a whole thing with the whole year thing where, some cultures in Nigeria, especially the Yoruba, will wear like black for like a whole year. And there's an understanding when you're wearing that you're grieving. You don't need to, ask for permission. Nobody needs to even ask you who died. When you see somebody looking like that, wearing black all from top to bottom, you know that they've lost someone. So there is that there is that space to grieve. With the pandemic, especially living here, in the United States, living in the West, where there is a hyper focus on the individual, and a less focus on the community, we have lost our ability to be able to remember that we have a social contract to each other, and we don't care for each other as much as we should, especially for those of us who come from more communal, cultures, whether it's from Asia or in somewhere in India or somewhere in China or somewhere, in the African continent or even in the Middle East. In the West, there's such a hyper focus on individualism. And so when you have that and you wrap that up with the pandemic, you can see how painful grieving can be, because there is no social, there's nobody checking on you. There's nobody coming over to your house, nobody to give you hugs, nobody to, cook and clean and all of that for you. So that means your grieving process is going to be longer. It's going to take more time. And so you really need to be very, very patient with yourself, tapping into the resources that you can get, talk to friends, talk to family members, get a therapist, things like that, because you don't want to do all of the 100% work of grieving alone. It has to be the communal side and the individual side, and try to get as much of that communal side as much as you can.
Thank you. Yeah, not being able to grieve with other people has been one of the major challenges for people who have lost loved ones. And even as a nation, we've lost over 340,000 Americans. That's about 1 in 1,000 Americans, you know. And yet it seems that we're not that outraged, or we're not even grieving as a nation. What is responsible for this lack of national grieving? Are we getting used to the deaths, just as people get used to deaths in a war zone?
Absolutely. Like I said earlier, what I have noticed living in the West, I used to live in the UK and now I live in the US, is there's a hyper focus on the person, more so in America. I think America takes that individualism to a different level. It's on steroids. Because when I lived in Europe, when I lived in the UK, there is still a sense that we have a social contract, that we have a social responsibility to one another, even though you might not know your neighbor. There's something like the NHS, the National Health Service, and things like that, right? In the US, there is such a focus on the person. There's such a focus on individualization that is to the detriment of the collective. And I think we've lost our collective souls We've lost our way back to one another. And that's the reason why we can have over 300,000 people dead. And it's not a big deal. We're not angered by it. We're not asking for accountability because we're so focused on ourselves and what pertains to us and me, 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 me. There is literally in my this is my theory that being a very selfish person, being narcissistic has become something that as a society we have accepted as normal. We have normalized, selfishness. We have normalized narcissistic traits. And I'm really worried for our children. I'm really worried for the future because if the adults can't get their acts together, if we can't think about wearing a mask to protect, somebody we don't know, right? We're like, well, I'm fine. I'm healthy. I don't have any underlying health conditions. Well, we're not just talking about you. What about the elderly person? What about the person that you would never meet, but will die because you didn't, think that you have a social contract, that you have a social responsibility to the other? So I think there's something about the whole idea of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps that is antithetical to being a human being. I think if we had for the human as we have evolved over time, if this was our strategy, the humans, Homo sapiens, as a species, will not have survived. Because as a species, looking out for one another, right, thinking about the collective as well as the individual, was responsible for our survival. If this was how we did it from the beginning, we wouldn't be here. This doesn't work. It doesn't work. And I think that as a culture here in the United States, we're struggling because we're in that place where narcissism is normalized.
Yeah, we are really struggling because it's very incredible that almost everyone knows somebody who died of COVID.
Yes.
Yet we're having over 3,000 deaths a
300.
day. We're
Yeah,
about 3,000 deaths a day, and it seems normal. You're
yeah.
not really seeing evidence of grieving. You're not seeing evidence of mourning. Even I believe by now the flag should be an half staff
Yes.
for as long as people keep dying like that every day, to for people to realize that souls are dying. People like us are dying. Fellow Americans are dying. They have families, they have loved ones, they have dreams, they have resolutions, they had all these things that we all aspire to. They are also going after the American dreams, but their lives were truncated by COVID.
Yeah.
And yet everyone just moves on. Another one dead, you just move on. It is pretty sad.
It is.
Yeah. Then how can people keep their faith and hope in a year that seems to be that might be unpredictable, like 2020, and since the pandemic is still very much around? How can people maintain hope or even keep their faith?
Mm. Ooh, that's a hard question. It's hard to maintain hope when there is no end in sight. There's a saying in our culture about hope delayed, and I don't even know how to translate that. That it sickens the soul. When hope is delayed, the soul becomes sick, and so
Weary.
the soul becomes weary.
And tired.
And so, what'd you say?
It becomes weary and tired.
Yes. And so to want to have hope when there is no end in sight, yes, we're hearing about the vaccines and things like that. But is the rollout has been terrible. We're not doing a good job. We don't have a federal response. We don't have a federal plan to make sure that this is done well. We're leaving it all to the states when the states are already stressed out, when nurses and doctors are getting sick. And so there's a lot that we can dispatch from a federal level that we're not doing. Because of that, it makes hope um, really difficult. And so it depends on you, really, how you want to work with hope. Because I've often said that sometimes hope can be a setup for people who have experienced a lot of trauma, where they have experienced so many bad things happening. Having one more hope just means that it's highly likely that those things are not going to happen, right? So I don't think you need to have hope as a prerequisite to growth, right? I don't think you need hope as a prerequisite to move forward. I think hope in itself, rather than it being a prerequisite, can be an outcome. So some of us need hope to be able to get up each day like, oh, I hope it will get better. And those things are typically rooted in our experiences of things getting better, of things working out most of the time. And then there are others who don't have those experiences. And something like the pandemic is another reason for them to go, see, I told you life sucks, right? For those people, hope can now be a setup. But I often say to them, you don't worry about that hope thing, right? Let me hold on to it for you. Hope can now become an outcome. When things start to work out, they can be like, oh, wow, it did work out. Oh, so now I can have hope for the next thing. So it depends on who you are. It depends on what your experiences are. So let me tackle for the person that hope has been a setup for, that doesn't need hope as a prerequisite, but it could become a product of the experience. What I will say to you is focus on the tangible things that are within your control. Focus on the things that you can handle. Make those things small, make them measurable, make them easy to do. Start with the easiest plan, start with the easiest thing. So, for example, we're talking about resolutions or goals or plans or whatever for the new year. Instead of it, you have this grand idea that you're going to lose 50 pounds, because this is usually where people go, right? And that's at the top of your list. And the next thing on your list is spend time with family. And that, all of those come down to the bottom. I say start with the easiest and the smallest. The things that you really can control, which may be like, maybe sweep, my house more. Maybe make sure I get more sleep. Maybe make sure that I regulate, the time that I go to sleep every night. Start really working on those self-care, making sure that I am eating healthier, making sure that I am spending time with my loved ones, checking in on people, be a better friend, things like that. Because as you start doing that and it's working, there's a ripple effect that occurs. And for those that need hope as a prerequisite, there are places of hope. There are people doing amazing things every day, people doing incredible things in their community. And we might not hear that a lot on the news, but you're going to have to go look for it. Or you're going to have to be the one creating it. Find ways to be helpful to other people. If you don't have the hope, go create hope for somebody else. Find a way to bless someone. Find a way to go to a store and somebody who, if you have the means, somebody is paying for their grocery bill and you say, I'll pay for it for you. Somebody buying gas, you say, I'll buy gas for you. Donate to food banks that are really struggling to feed people right now. Find a way in your life to be a blessing unto others, because sometimes even doing something small can take your mind off of your own issues and you feel good just serving others.
Just going out there to be a blessing to others can be therapeutic. And yeah, the last year, has a year that has a lot of guilt to distribute. And what I mean by that is that there are a lot of people that they think they're just living their own lives, doing their own thing, making their own choices. And while they're doing that, they got other people infected. And some of those people died. And now they're saddled with this guilt that they innocently, unintentionally killed somebody else. What advice do you have for people like that? And they're carrying that guilt into the new year. And in fact, there are still some people that are going to, feel that guilt even in this new year, thinking that, well, I'm okay now, get someone infected, and that person end up dying.
Yeah. Those stories, I know you and I have, talked about this. We've read a lot of stories like that, people meeting up with their parents and then trying to be, so the one that we just talked about the other day was, trying to meet with a parent 45 minutes, socially distanced, wearing masks, and still the parents dying, and the guilt that comes with that. What I would say to the person is this: it is okay that you feel guilty. The goal is not to take away your guilt. right? Because it doesn't matter how many times what I say, it's not going to take away the fact that, that action had consequences. It was not the consequence that you wanted, it was not your intention, but that was the impact, right? And I often talk about there's a difference between intention and impact. Going into it, you had no intention of hurting anybody. Going into it, you had no intention of anybody dying. But the impact of it is you realize, like, wow, this virus is far more deadlier than I thought, right? And so giving yourself that space to feel the guilt that you do feel, and then asking yourself, what can I do with this feeling? How can I take this feeling and make it useful? How can I take this feeling and make it productive? Because if guilt, corners you, and then shame beats you down, you're not coming out. You're imprisoned. You're not going to feel better. You're not going to have any larger impact. So beyond licking your wounds and feeling bad, ask yourself, what can I do, in the name of this person as a legacy moving forward? What does it mean to make a mistake? Does my mistake always stay with me for the rest of my life? Does my mistake mean that I'm a bad person? You're going to have a lot of deep philosophical conversations with yourself. And that's a good thing, because that sense of introspection that comes upon you as a result of this can actually transport you or catapult you into a space where you have more empathy for people, into a space where you have more understanding of what it means to fall, to fail, to make mistakes, and having to claim back your humanity. And so you need to kind of stay in this space and struggle in it, and then learn the lesson and move forward. Because what you don't want to happen is this. You don't want to have lost someone that you didn't want to lose, and then your life is also lost. That the grieving, the sadness, the guilt has robbed you of your ability to live. If they're not here, you need to be here. You need to carry their legacy forward. So how can you make an impact in your own community? How can you make sure that you let people know your story? Making sure, like, COVID is very serious. Wear your mask. It kills. This is my story. And really help our community to be better and do better. That is how you move forward. If you just sit in it for a long time and you don't shift out of it, it doesn't help you. It doesn't help you, and it doesn't help anybody.
Thank you. Even in the midst of a desert, you have the oasis. So in 2020, in spite of all these challenges and all these upheavals, there are some people that things were good for.
Absolutely.
Things they were actually able to meet their goals. But nevertheless, because of the what I would call a national condition of grieving, even though we're not observing it, they were not able to share their good news. And some of them might feel this, what I would call like a survivor's guilt.
Yes.
Like, how come things are better for me when a lot of people are suffering? What advice do you have for people like that? And or for people that 2021 is going to be like that for?
Yeah.
That, in spite of the upheavals, some people are still going to be successful. How can they handle their mental health, knowing that death's around, sicknesses around, but I'm doing okay?
Yeah. You're asking great questions here today. Normalization. It's okay. It's okay that, good things are happening for you. If you were to walk around and ask people, I don't think you're going to find a lot of people who are going to say, I wish bad things were happening to you too. They want good news. People don't want other people to suffer, even as much as we are very highly individualistic. People don't want you to suffer. People don't want you to know what it feels like to lose a loved one. People don't want you to know what it feels like to lose a job. People don't want you to know what it feels like to lose your home, right? And so it's okay that you feel the way that you do. It's okay that you even have survivor's guilt. That comes with the territory. We can see the devastation. We know somebody that's been sick. We know somebody that is a long COVID. They call them the COVID long haulers that are still experiencing symptoms and all of that. We know people that have died, right? And yet, we're back to that whole two. When you're grieving, where there are those two kind of time that you're straddling, right? And so when you have survivor's guilt, is because you're aware of the suffering that is surrounding you, and that they're living in a different zone while you're living in a happy zone. And having compassion is not a bad thing. That's part of our social responsibility. Being able to see that people around you are suffering and that you're not out here showing off, making people feel some type of way is maturity. And also understanding that different seasons are going to bring different things for people. During the time when there was no pandemic, when things were going well for some people, bad things were happening, right? So bad things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people, good things happen to good people, and bad things happen to bad people. And you don't get to choose that. That sometimes just chooses you. So pre-pandemic, you might not have been doing a great job, but other people were having a great time. And maybe during this pandemic is when like your business is picking up. That's okay. That's all right. It's good that you have compassion. It's good that you have empathy. It's good that you are being mature about how you are broadcasting your success. At the same time, understand that nobody out here wants to see you suffer, because we know what suffering is and we don't wish it on our enemies.
Thank you. Because even as the Bible says, there is time for everything, a time to grieve, a time to rejoice. And another part of the Bible says that we rejoice with those who are rejoicing and grieve with those who are grieving.
Yeah. And
Well,
go ahead.
go ahead.
And it's a great thing that you quoted that passage about the time Ecclesiastes, right? A time for
Yes.
this and a time for that. And it doesn't say that one follows the other. It doesn't say that everybody's going to be experiencing those things during those time at the same time. It might be a time of sowing for me, but it might be a time of harvest for you. It might be a time of crying for me. It may be a time of happiness for you. There is no constant that we're all experiencing the happiness, the grieving, the crying all at the same time. However, we can see that somebody else is in a different season. And because we care, because we feel, responsible as part of our social contract, if it's a time of harvesting for you, and is a time of loss and crying for the other, right? You can take some of your harvest, you can take some of your encouragement and go help the other person who is in that time. So you having a good time, your business doing well during COVID, there's no reason for you to feel bad about it. But at the same time, it's important that you are aware of the suffering that is around you. And for the blessings that you've been given, find a way to bless other people.
Thank you. And how will you encapsulate, maybe with nuggets? What do you have to tell people who are thinking of setting their goals or making a resolution for 2021 while also maintaining good mental health?
Yes, I will say focus on what you have accomplished so far. Last year, I did a video right in January about the whole resolution thing. And kind of, I wasn't really a big fan of New Year, New Me. And I talked about the importance of honoring the old you, the importance of being able to look back and take stock of your own accomplishments. And many of us are going to look at 2020 and say, I didn't have any accomplishments. I didn't do anything. But you did. You got up every day. You called friends to make sure that they're okay. You sent text messages to that person that lost their family member. You sent, a meal train to somebody that just had a baby. You sat, with people through Zoom, who were sharing their good news and their bad news. You were taking care of your children. You were homeschooling them. You were a teacher that went to school and put your life and your family's life at risk. You were a doctor, a nurse that went and did something for people and put your life at risk. Every day that we got up in 2020, in spite of what 2020 brought to us, in spite of the fear of contracting something whenever we go outside or bringing something home to the people that we love, or worrying about our parents who are not with us, or thinking about how they're doing in the nursing home where they are, being able to get up every day in spite of all of that mess and that trauma and grieving pushing down on our brains and our bodies, being able to rise again every single day, brother, sister, that is a huge accomplishment. So before you roll into 2021 with all of your goals and all of your dreams and all of these things that you want to write, all this new you, new me, new year, new me thing, you need to honor. You need to honor the body that helped you get through 2020, because it is that experience that is going to help you get through 2021.
Well, thank you. And for those of you watching again, we wish you a happy new year as you are planning to set your goals or make your resolutions for 2021. Just be cognizant of the fact that you need to set goals that are realistic. You need to be flexible. You need to have faith and hope in those goals. And you need to be able to adjust your expectations based on your circumstances. And above all, you need also to be able to walk towards those goals. And you need to have another way of calibrating or measuring success, because sometimes success has to be measured with the amount of effort you put in. Because 2020 has taught us that you could make plans, but then situations or a pandemic can just turn everything around. Does that mean that you're failed? Maybe not. You haven't failed. As long as you have life, you have hope, as long as you have the determination to still be able to move on. And just as Jimmy said, we all have some kind of social responsibility to one another. Preventing others from catching the disease, from dying, is a responsibility that belongs to each and every one of us. And doing that too, we also get to, at least in a way, help others in in ways that they'll be able to manage their mental health. Because if you stay healthy and you also plan on keeping others healthy, some of these mental health issues that we have from 2020 that will still carry over to 2021, most of those things can be managed. You know, thank you again for coming on the show, and we appreciate your insight, your professional wisdom, and your recommendations. Do you have any parting words?
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. And thank you again for joining us on this episode of Legal Angle with Emmanuel the Law Olawale. You can follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and also on YouTube. And also make sure you download the podcast episodes of some of these titles. Again, Happy New Year, and we'll look forward to giving you very wonderful, educative, entertaining, and intellectual content in this 2021. Thank you. Until next time, stay safe and stay blessed.